Relentless November rain washed over the alleyway, diluting the crimson spreading across the pavement. The man bleeding out was a complete stranger to me, but walking away wasn't an option. Stepping in front of the bullet meant for his skull was my first mistake. Surviving it was my second. My name is Caleb. If you looked at my forged medical license and the cheap scent blockers I bought off the black market, you'd think I was just another beta trying to survive the meat grinder that is South Boston. The truth is, I'm an Omega. In my world, an unbonded Omega without family protection is nothing more than currency, a pawn to be traded, used and discarded by alphas. So I hid. I kept my head down, suppressed my nature with dangerous amounts of chemicals, and worked the graveyard shift at a clandestine underground clinic, patchworking criminals who couldn't risk a real hospital. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when the illusion of my safe, miserable life shattered. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a deafening beat against the rusted fire escapes of the alley behind the clinic. I had just stepped out the back door to toss a bag of biohazard waste into the dumpster when the scent hit me. It wasn't the usual stench of garbage and wet asphalt. It was a pheromone so potent, so raw, it felt like a physical blow to the chest. Pine needles, crushed mint, and the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder. A prime alpha. And he was in distress. Before my brain could tell my body to run back inside and lock the steel door, a heavy thud echoed through the alley, followed by the unmistakable crack of a silenced pistol. I dropped the garbage bag and peered around the edge of the brick wall. 3 men. 2 were dressed in cheap leather, holding guns. The third was on his knees. Even in the dim, flickering light of a broken street lamp, the man on his knees looked terrifying. He was massive, his broad shoulders straining the fabric of a ruined designer suit. Blood was pouring from a gash on his temple, blinding his left eye. But he wasn't begging. He was laughing, a dark, raspy sound that sent a primal shiver down my spine. "Say goodnight, Romano," one of the thugs sneered, leveling his weapon right at the kneeling man's forehead. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the oath I took to save lives before the medical board revoked my license. Maybe it was the overwhelming pull of the alpha's distress pheromones, dragging my buried Omega instincts to the surface. Whatever it was, I didn't think. I lunged. I slammed into the shooter's side just as his finger squeezed the trigger. A deafening blast ruptured my eardrum. Simultaneously, a blinding, white-hot agony tore through my left shoulder. I hit the wet pavement hard, gasping for air as the world spun into a chaotic blur of rain and shadow. In the span of 5 seconds, the dynamics shifted. The Alpha One had just saved didn't hesitate. With terrifying, predatory speed, he surged upward. He snapped the wrist of the man I had tackled, taking his dropped gun in a fluid motion, and put 2 bullets into the chest of the second thug. He then turned and finished off the first. Silence descended on the alley, save for the rain and my own ragged whistling breaths. I clutched my shoulder, feeling the hot, sticky rush of my own blood seeping through my scrubs. Heavy footsteps approached me. Boots stopped inches from my face. I looked up. Up close, the Alpha's eyes were a startling, piercing gold, the hallmark of an Alpha running purely on adrenaline and instinct. He had a jagged scar tracing the line of his strong jaw, and his chest heaved as he stared down at me. "You're out of your mind," he growled, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone. "You just took a bullet for a dead man." "Why?" "Because," I wheezed, spitting rainwater from my mouth. "I'm a nurse, you idiot, and if you don't help me inside, we're both going to be dead men." He didn't argue. He hauled me to my feet with one arm, his strength terrifying, and half carried, half dragged me into the clinic. I locked the heavy steel door behind us and immediately collapsed into the nearest rolling chair. "Medical supplies," I grunted, pointing to the metal cabinets with my good arm. "Gauze, iodine, the suture kit, and the lidocaine. Bottom shelf." For a Mafia enforcer, or whatever he was, he followed directions surprisingly well. He dumped the supplies on the metal tray beside me. My hands were shaking too badly to inject the local anesthetic, let alone dig the bullet out. The Alpha watched me struggle for a moment before pushing my hands away. "Sit still," he commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an Alpha command. My Omega biology betrayed me, forcing my muscles to instantly go slack. He tore the fabric of my scrubs away, exposing the bloody mess of my shoulder. "Bullet went clean through," he noted, his voice suddenly clinical and detached. "You're lucky. It missed the artery." He cleaned the wound with brutal efficiency. The pain was excruciating, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. That was when I realized my mistake. The sweat, the panic, the tearing of my clothes. The cheap scent-blocking patches I wore on my scent glands were peeling off. The Alpha froze. His golden eyes dilated until they were almost entirely black. He leaned down, his nose grazing the bare skin of my uninjured neck. He inhaled deeply, a long, shuddering breath. "Vanilla," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with sudden possessiveness. "Vanilla and petrichor. You're an Omega." I shoved him back with my good arm, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm a medical professional. Back off," he chuckled, wiping my blood from his hands with a towel. A brave little Omega hiding in the slums, throwing himself in front of .45 calibers. "I'm Dante." He reached out, calloused fingers brushing against my uninjured cheek. "I owe you my life, little one. The Romano family doesn't forget a debt, and we never leave what belongs to us." Before I could ask him what the hell that meant, he turned and walked out the back door, melting into the stormy night, leaving me bleeding, terrified, and horribly exposed. 7 days passed. 7 days of looking over my shoulder at every shadow, jumping at every car backfire, and nursing a gunshot wound with stolen antibiotics. I thought I was in the clear. I convinced myself that Dante Romano was just a phantom of the underworld, a violent hallucination born from a late-night adrenaline rush. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was actually shining, a rare occurrence in Boston. I was walking back to my tiny apartment, carrying a bag of groceries, the throbbing in my shoulder finally starting to subside into a dull ache. A sleek, heavily armored black Lincoln Navigator pulled up quietly to the curb beside me. I didn't even have time to drop my groceries. The rear doors slid open, and 2 massive men in tailored suits stepped out. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. The suffocating weight of their beta auras told me they were enforcers. "Caleb," the taller one said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know who you are," I lied, backing away. "Get in the car," the other instructed smoothly. "Please do not make us use force. We were given strict orders not to bruise you." I weighed my options. Run and likely get shot in the back, or get in the car and hope I could talk my way out of whatever this was. I swallowed hard, abandoning my groceries on the sidewalk, and climbed into the plush leather interior of the SUV. They blindfolded me immediately. We drove for over an hour. When the vehicle finally stopped, the air had changed. It smelled like the ocean, salty and crisp, indicating we were far outside the city limits, likely at a private coastal estate. I was guided out of the car, up a long flight of stone steps, and into a building where the air conditioning hummed, and the scent of expensive floor wax and old money filled the air. The blindfold was ripped off. I blinked against the harsh light, finding myself standing in the center of an obscenely lavish study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, a massive mahogany desk sat at the far end, and a roaring fire crackled in a marble fireplace. And then the scent hit me. Not just one, but 3 overwhelming, distinct alpha pheromones. My knees actually buckled, and I had to grab the back of a leather armchair to stay standing. My inner Omega was screaming, terrified, awestruck, and submissive all at once. The heavy oak doors behind me clicked shut. From the shadows near the fireplace stepped a man. My heart leaped into my throat. It was him. Tall, dark hair, broad shoulders, wearing a pristine charcoal suit. "Dante," I breathed out. The man paused, tilting his head. His eyes weren't gold. They were a freezing, piercing blue. And his scent was wrong. It wasn't pen and gunpowder. It was cedar and frost. "Close," the man said, his voice smoother, colder, devoid of the raspy edge Dante had. But incorrect. A second door behind the desk opened. Another man walked out. My brain short-circuited. He looked exactly like the first man. The same sharp jawline, the same towering height, the same dark hair. But his suit was unbuttoned at the collar, a lazy, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. His scent washed over me, rich sandalwood and expensive scotch. "Don't tease the poor thing, Dominic," the second man drawled, leaning against the edge of the mahogany desk. "He looks like he's about to pass out." "I am merely establishing the facts, Dario," the first man, Dominic, replied coldly. Before I could form a single rational thought, the main doors opened again. And there he was, the scar on his jaw, the feral gold flickering in his eyes, the scent of pine and gunpowder. Dante. He walked straight past the other two, ignoring them entirely, and stopped inches in front of me. He reached out, his large hand cupping the back of my neck right over my scent gland. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. "I told you I'd come back for you, little Omega," Dante purred. I looked frantically between the three of them. Dominic, Dario, Dante. The Romano triplets, the undisputed, utterly ruthless kings of the East Coast Mafia. Identical alpha triplets were a biological impossibility, a myth whispered about in Omegaverse lore. When alphas were born identical, their competitive natures usually drove them to tear each other apart before they reached adulthood. But these three, they weren't fighting. They were perfectly in sync. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound brave. "I saved your life. I did my part. Let me go." Dominic, clearly the eldest and the don of the family, stepped forward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You misunderstand the situation, Caleb. You intervened in Romano family business. You bled for our blood." Dario chuckled, swirling a glass of amber liquid he had just poured. "And Dante hasn't stopped obsessing over the little vanilla-scented nurse who took a bullet for him since he got back. You belong to us now," Dante stated flatly, his thumb stroking my pulse point. "I don't belong to anyone," I snapped, slapping Dante's hand away. A dangerous silence fell over the room. 3 sets of predatory eyes locked onto me. Dominic adjusted his cuffs, his gaze burning into mine. "We are Romanos. We share an empire. We share our wealth. We share our blood." He stepped closer, crowding my space, his icy scent mingling with Dante's fire and Dario's intoxicating spice. And when one of us finds a mate worthy of our family, we share him too. You are not leaving this estate, Caleb. Your life in the slums is over. Welcome to the family. The mattress was too soft. That was my first thought when the heavy fog of exhaustion finally lifted. It lacked the familiar, comforting lump of broken springs I was used to in my South Boston apartment. I opened my eyes, staring up at a vaulted ceiling adorned with intricate crown molding. The air in the room was heavy, thick with the mingling scents of cedar, Scotch, and pine. It was suffocating. I sat up, a sharp hiss escaping my teeth as the muscles in my left shoulder protested. The gunshot wound had been re-bandaged. The rough gauze I had used at the clinic was gone, replaced by high-grade medical wrappings and a heavy dose of topical painkillers that smelled faintly of sterile iodine. I swung my legs over the edge of the massive mahogany bed, my bare feet sinking into a thick Persian rug. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out. The Atlantic Ocean crashed aggressively against jagged rocks 100 feet below. There were no fire escapes, no adjacent buildings, just a sheer drop and miles of churning grey water. I was entirely isolated. I pressed my forehead against the cold, reinforced glass and let out a shaky breath. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. No one knew the real reason I lunged in front of that gun in the alleyway. It wasn't blind heroism or the overwhelming pull of an alpha's distress pheromones. It was calculation. Cold, desperate calculation, born from a memory that didn't belong to this timeline. I had lived this year before. In my previous life, I had stayed behind the brick wall of the clinic. I had watched the thugs execute Dante Romano, leaving his massive body to rot in the garbage. And because of that, the Romano syndicate crumbled into a bloody civil war, leaving a power vacuum in the city. District Attorney Richard Collins, a corrupt, untouchable monster who built his political career on the backs of unregistered Omegas, seized that vacuum. 6 months from now, in that past life, Collins's task force had raided my clinic. They didn't arrest me. They dragged me to a damp, concrete holding cell under the precinct, where Collins himself watched as a crooked doctor slipped a lethal dose of potassium chloride into my IV. I died gasping for air on a filthy floor, framed as the mastermind of an underground trafficking ring that Collins actually ran. When I woke up gasping in my own bed, a full year in the past, I knew I had to change the script. I needed a weapon sharp enough to cut down a district attorney who owned the police force and the judges. I needed the Romanos. Taking the bullet for Dante was my way of binding the most dangerous men in New England to a blood debt. What I hadn't factored into my desperate equation was the primal, possessive biology of identical alpha triplets finding an unbonded omega. The heavy lock on the bedroom door clicked, pulling me from my thoughts. The door swung open, and Dario stepped in. He had traded his suit jacket for a fitted black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose forearms corded with muscle and dark ink. He carried a silver tray holding a plate of rare steak, roasted potatoes, and a glass of water. His dark eyes tracked my movement as I turned away from the window. He set the tray on a small glass table near the fireplace. "You need to eat, Caleb," Dario said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr that reverberated in my chest. "Your body is working overtime to heal the tissue damage, and your scent is souring with stress. It's distressing." "I'm not hungry," I lied. My stomach was a hollow pit, but I refused to act like a captive pet, accepting scraps from its master. "I want my clothes back, and I want to speak to Dominic." Dario chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. He leaned against the back of a leather armchair, crossing his arms. The scent of sandalwood and expensive scotch spiked in the room, warm and intoxicating, designed by nature to make an omega pliant. I dug my fingernails into my palms, using the sharp, grounding sting of pain to keep my mind clear. Dominic is dealing with the fallout of the hit on Dante, Dario replied, his amusement fading into something colder. He's currently redecorating a warehouse with the insides of the men who ordered the strike. You are confined to this room for your own safety. The city is bleeding right now, and you are far too valuable to be left unguarded. I'm not a possession, I snapped, taking a step toward him. I didn't take that bullet, so you could lock me in a gilded cage. I'm a medical professional. I am an independent citizen. In a blur of motion, Dario crossed the room. Before I could flinch, his large hand wrapped around my throat. He didn't squeeze. The grip was entirely structural, holding me in place with terrifying ease. He backed me against the cold glass of the window, his chest pressing against mine. His eyes were completely black, his pupils dilated to the edge of his irises. You are whatever we say you are, Dario whispered against my ear, his hot breath making the hairs on my neck stand up. You bled for our brother. You carry our scent on your skin. Out there, you were a target. In here, you are a king. Accept it, Caleb. Fighting your nature will only exhaust you. I'm not fighting my nature, I rasped, maintaining eye contact despite every biological instinct screaming at me to submit and bare my neck. I'm fighting your arrogance. I want to see Dominic, now. Because if you three think you're the only ones playing a game in this city, you're dead wrong. Dario searched my face, the absolute certainty in my voice giving him pause. Slowly, he released my throat, stepping back just enough to let me breathe, though his imposing frame still trapped me against the window. Fine, Dario murmured, a dangerous smirk returning to his lips. I love a creature with teeth. I'll fetch my brothers. But you better have something damn interesting to say, little one. 20 minutes later, I was seated in the center of the sprawling study I had been brought to the day before. The fire was roaring, casting long, dancing shadows across the mahogany shelves. I sat perfectly straight in a high-backed leather chair, ignoring the throbbing pain in my shoulder. The kings of the East Coast stood before me. Dominic sat behind the heavy desk, his fingers steepled, his icy blue eyes analyzing me like a complex ledger. Dario leaned against the bookshelf, swirling his scotch. Dante stood closest to me, his massive arms crossed, his golden eyes tracking my every breath, the scent of pine and gunpowder wrapping around me like a protective, suffocating blanket. Dario says you have demands, Dominic stated, his voice a flat, freezing calm. I suggest you choose your next words with absolute precision, Caleb. You are alive because Dante claims you. Do not test my patience. I met his icy stare. I didn't save Dante out of the goodness of my heart. Dante stiffened beside me, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But he didn't interrupt. I tracked the movements of the Toretti family for 3 weeks, I lied smoothly, weaving the knowledge of my past life into a believable narrative. I knew they were going to make a move on Dante in that alley. I was waiting. I took that bullet because I needed the Romano family in my debt. Dominic's eyes narrowed. You're a back-alley nurse. Why would you orchestrate a blood debt with the Mafia? Because District Attorney Richard Collins is hunting me, I said, dropping the name like a live grenade onto the desk. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted. The casual arrogance dropped from Dario's posture, his hand freezing on his glass. Dante stepped closer to me, his jaw clenching. "Collins," Dominic repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "The White Knight of the City, the man currently building a RICO case against my shipments at the docks." "He's not a white knight," I said, leaning forward. "He runs the underground trafficking rings in the slums. He uses the city's vice squad to raid unregistered Omega clinics, but they don't arrest the Omegas. They vanish them. He sells them to private buyers overseas and pockets the cash, laundering it through his re-election campaign." "I know, because I treated 3 Omegas who escaped his transit houses. I have the ledger numbers, the names of the dirty cops on his payroll, and the locations of his drop houses." I tapped my temple. "It's all in here." I let the silence stretch, watching the 3 brothers process the intelligence. I was offering them the ultimate weapon to destroy the man, trying to dismantle their empire. "If he finds out I have this information, I am dead," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "So here is the deal. I am not your pet. I am not a prize to be locked in a tower. I will stay here. I will allow you to claim me. But in exchange, you take this information, you burn Collins's trafficking ring to the absolute ground, and you bring me his head." Dominic stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. The cold calculation in his eyes slowly shifted into something far more dangerous. Respect. He looked at Dario, who nodded slowly, a vicious, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked at Dante, who was staring down at me with unbridled, feral pride. "You want to dismantle the district attorney," Dominic said, a dark smirk finally breaking his icy facade. "You want to weaponize us for your own social crusade." "I want justice for the people he slaughtered," I corrected coldly. "You want your docks clear. We align." "We bleed for what is ours," Dante rumbled, placing a heavy, warm hand on my uninjured shoulder. "Collins touched your people. He threatened your life. That makes him a dead man." "Agreed," Dominic said, standing up. "Give Dario the locations. We move tonight." The execution was not a simple assassination. It was a systematic, brutal dismantling of a corrupt empire. The Romanos didn't just want Collins dead. They wanted him ruined. Over the next 48 hours, while I remained in the fortified estate, the city burned. Using the information from my past life, Dominic dispatched enforcers to every transit house Collins operated. They didn't just kill the guards. They liberated the captive Omegas, funneling them into safe houses funded by Romano money. Dario took the financial ledgers I provided and leaked them simultaneously to the FBI, the press, and the rival cartels Collins had been double-crossing. The hard karma hit Collins with the force of a freight train. Within a day, his assets were frozen, his political allies abandoned him, and warrants were issued for his arrest. But the police never got to him. On the 3rd night, I was standing by the window in the study, watching the rain lash against the glass, when the heavy oak doors opened. Dante, Dario, and Dominic walked in. They were soaked in rain, their expensive suits ruined, the metallic tang of fresh blood mingling heavily with their alpha pheromones. Dante was carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag. He walked past the desk and dropped the bag at my feet, with a wet, heavy thud. "The transit houses are ashes," Dominic said, pouring 3 fingers of scotch into a glass and downing it in one swift motion. "The corrupt officers on his payroll have been relieved of their duties permanently, and Dear Collins will not be prosecuting any more cases." I looked down at the duffel bag. The fabric was stained dark crimson at the bottom. The man who had ordered my execution in another life, The man who had built a throne on the suffering of my kind was gone. The timeline was broken. I had rewritten my fate. Dante stepped forward, his golden eyes burning with an intense possessive heat. He reached out, his thumbs gently wiping a stray tear of pure relief from my cheek. "The debt is paid, Caleb," Dante whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute devotion. "The monster is dead. Your ghosts are quiet." Dario stepped up behind me, his chest pressing against my back, his chin resting near my shoulder. "You commanded the kings, little one," he murmured, his intoxicating spice scent wrapping around me. "And we delivered." Dominic approached slowly, stopping just inches away, completing the circle. The three of them surrounded me, an impenetrable wall of muscle, power, and overwhelming alpha presence. The air was thick, suffocating, and incredibly warm. "You bought us with your blood, Caleb," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its icy edge. "But you bound us with your mind. You are no longer a captive. You are the center of this syndicate, the Omega King of the East Coast." I looked at the three terrifying men who had claimed me. I had traded the danger of the slums for a different kind of cage, one forged of violence, obsession, and unbreakable loyalty. But as Dante leaned down and pressed his lips to my scent gland, claiming me completely, I realized something. I wasn't trapped in the cage. I held the keys. My second life didn't bring peace, but it brought power. I went from a hunted Omega to the untouchable king of the East Coast, standing beside three alphas who would burn the world to keep me safe. This isn't just a romance. It's a warning. If you loved this dark journey of revenge, loyalty, and rebirth, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Want to hear another Mafia storytelling masterpiece? Drop your ideas in the comments below.